They gathered every Sunday for family dinner, a tradition built on love, laughter, and home-cooked meals. But one bite changed everything. Within hours, half the family was dead. And the woman at the center of it all? She was already washing the dishes, smiling. In today's true crime story, we dive into a chilling tale of deception that unfolded around the dinner table. When a beloved family tradition turned into a scene of mass poisoning, investigators were left asking, how could a mother smile while serving death on a plate? This is the haunting story of trust shattered, secrets exposed, and a killer hiding in plain sight. For the Wakefield family, Sunday dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. At 5 p.m. sharp, the mismatched cars would line up the driveway of the old Victorian home in Fairview, Illinois. Kids would spill out first, then parents with Tupperware bowls and warm smiles. At the center of it all was Miriam Wakefield, the matriarch, a woman everyone described as pure warmth. Her roasts were legendary, her mashed potatoes creamy perfection, and her chocolate mousse had won 3 county fair ribbons. But no one knew that Miriam had been planning the most unforgettable meal of her life. That particular Sunday, September 17th, was like any other. The scent of rosemary chicken wafted through the air. Jazz played softly in the background. Miriam, dressed in her favorite sunflower apron, welcomed everyone with a kiss on the cheek and a plate already warm in the oven. There were 12 guests at the table that night. Her 3 children, their spouses, 5 grandchildren, and her estranged brother, Martin, visiting for the first time in a decade. Within 2 hours, 3 of them would be dead. 2 more would be on life support. And Miriam? She would be calmly offering everyone second helpings. Dinner started as it always did, with laughter. Conversations overlapped, wine flowed, and Miriam beamed with pride as compliments flew her way. No one noticed her hands tremble slightly as she served the mushroom gravy, nor the long pause she took before setting down the bowl of creamed spinach. By dessert, her grandson Kyle had complained of dizziness. His mother Dana looked pale. Then Martin, strong, gruff Martin, stood up to excuse himself and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Miriam stood frozen, clutching a dessert spoon. Paramedics were called. CPR was attempted. Within the hour, Martin was pronounced dead. Dana's pulse weakened. Kyle started vomiting uncontrollably. A once joyful home had transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. The EMTs asked if anyone had allergies, if anything odd had been consumed. Miriam blinked, slowly shaking her head, insisting everything was homemade, fresh, local, clean. Her hands were clean, she kept saying. But her eyes were far too calm. At the hospital, toxicology reports returned with disturbing clarity. Traces of aconitine, a deadly neurotoxin derived from the wolfsbane plant, were found in the victim's systems. Not a common allergen. Not accidental food poisoning. Aconitine was rare, difficult to detect in small doses, and nearly impossible to obtain without specific knowledge. Police circled back to the Wakefield home, now sealed off with crime scene tape. In the kitchen, they found a bottle mislabeled as organic spice blend, tucked behind the flour. Lab tests confirmed it was powdered wolfsbane. The only fingerprints on the bottle belonged to Miriam Wakefield. She didn't cry during questioning. She didn't ask who had died. She only asked one thing: did anyone finish the mousse? How could a woman who doted on her family, who kissed scraped knees and baked birthday cakes, turn into a calculating murderer? Detectives began digging, and found a darkness that had simmered beneath Miriam's maternal facade for years. Legal documents revealed that Miriam had recently changed her will. In it, she left everything, not to her children, but to an animal sanctuary 3 towns over, one she had never visited. There were also quiet signs: canceled therapy appointments, a pharmacy purchase for a sedative never prescribed to her, and a cryptic note tucked into her Bible that read, "Sometimes to cleanse the garden you must pull the roots." Family members were in disbelief. Her son Jared kept repeating, "She made me soup when I was sick. She's not capable of this." But forensic evidence told a different story. The most haunting image, captured by the granddaughter's phone left recording on the table, was this. As Martin convulsed, as Dana gasped for air, and as Kyle fell to his knees, Miriam stood beside the counter, a bowl of chocolate mousse in one hand, smiling. That smile would later become the most damning detail in court. Calm, collected, almost relieved. If gripping true crime stories that peel back the layers of ordinary lives gone horrifyingly wrong keep you at the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss the twisted truths we uncover next. Behind every family recipe was a story, and Miriam's had been hiding in the shadows for decades. The poison wasn't just in the food. It was in the bloodline, in the secrets she swore to take to her grave. But the truth always blooms, especially when it's watered with revenge. Miriam Wakefield had always been considered the glue of the family. But glue can become corrosive when it holds too tightly. After her arrest, the town of Fairview was stunned into silence. This wasn't a woman with a criminal record or an erratic past. She had sung in the church choir, ran bake sales, and organized charity food drives. But as investigators dug deeper, they found that Miriam's life had been anything but tranquil. In fact, it was a garden of secrets, and she'd spent years trying to prune it. Born Miriam Graves in 1954, she was the youngest of 5 and the only daughter in a stern, deeply religious household. Her father, Harold Graves, was a fire and brimstone preacher who ruled the house with a leather belt and a glass of bourbon. Her mother, Violet, suffered in silence, until one day in 1968 she vanished without explanation. Miriam, then just 14, told neighbors her mother had run off with a man. But some whispered that Harold buried her in the garden behind the church. That garden, lush with lavender, foxglove, and later wolfsbane, would become Miriam's obsession. She married young at 19 to Russell Wakefield, a quiet man from Indiana who worked in construction. They had 3 children in quick succession: Jared, Lillian, and Ethan. By all appearances, they were the picture of American family life. But tragedy seemed to orbit Miriam like a dark moon. Russell died in a freak scaffolding accident when the youngest, Ethan, was only 4. Years later, Lillian was hospitalized for internal bleeding from what was publicly described as a fall. And Ethan, once a vibrant young man, dropped out of college and disappeared from family events entirely by his late 20s. Something was always just a little off. But no one questioned Miriam. She baked. She smiled. She hosted. After her arrest, investigators retrieved several items from her home, including a worn leather-bound journal hidden behind a false panel in her bedroom wall. The contents were chilling. There were entries stretching back 30 years. Most were mundane: weather updates, notes about the garden, grocery lists. But scattered among them were darker passages. One, dated February 3, 1998, read, "Lillian came home drunk again. Said awful things. I made her tea. Added just a pinch from the jar. She needs to learn peace." Another entry, far more recent, just months before the deadly Sunday dinner, read, "They never appreciated the work. The sacrifices. I fed them. I cleaned up their messes. Now they circle like vultures for my house, my money. But I will serve the final word. And my table. My rules." Even more alarming was a list. 12 names. The exact 12 who had shown up for dinner that night. Next to 3 of them, Martin, Dana, and Kyle, was a small X. Those were the ones who died. Prosecutors initially believed the motive was financial. Miriam had rewritten her will and transferred the deed to her home to an obscure animal sanctuary just weeks before the dinner. But when questioned, the sanctuary's director said she had never met Miriam. The documents had arrived via certified mail, with no return address. It was as if Miriam had been erasing her ties before striking. What emerged instead was a pattern of long-simmering resentments. Her son Jared had recently filed to gain power of attorney, citing concerns over Miriam's mental health and finances. Her daughter Lillian had threatened to place her in assisted living. Her estranged brother Martin, who'd only returned to town to contest their late father's estate, was rumored to have been the one who convinced their father to cut Miriam out of the inheritance altogether. To Miriam, this wasn't dinner. It was Judgment Day. Botanists called it Aconitum napellus. Locals called it wolfsbane. Miriam called it the root of silence. She'd grown it for years, hidden among her hydrangeas and lilacs. Neighbors thought it was ornamental. But aconitine, the poison extracted from wolfsbane, is deadly in even tiny doses. One bite laced gravy and symptoms would appear in minutes: vomiting, paralysis, cardiac arrest. There is no known antidote. Investigators discovered a small distillation kit in her shed, carefully cleaned but still bearing traces of alkaloid residue. It was clear, this wasn't a rash decision. It had been years, possibly decades, in the making. Digging further into her past, investigators began questioning the causes of other family deaths that had seemed natural at the time. Russell Wakefield's fall had been ruled accidental, but a second look at the autopsy suggested possible muscle seizure prior to impact. Lillian's mysterious hospitalization? Her blood work, never tested for toxins, now seemed suspicious in hindsight. And Ethan? Still missing. Miriam had told neighbors he moved out west. but no one had spoken to him in 14 years. His last known location was Fairview. Cadaver dogs were dispatched to the garden. What they uncovered would shake the community to its core. If you want more chilling stories that reveal what people are capable of behind closed doors, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. True crime like this isn't fiction. It's happening in neighborhoods just like yours. When the cadaver dogs barked at the rose bushes, officers thought it might be a false alert. But beneath the soil that Miriam had tended for years, they unearthed something that turned a poisoning case into a suspected serial murder investigation. Miriam's garden didn't grow secrets, it buried them. The Wakefield garden had always been a source of pride for Miriam. Neighborhood kids called it the fairy yard because of the bright poppies, trimmed hedges, and delicate fountains. But in the days following the Sunday dinner massacre, it became a crime scene. Local news cameras zoomed in from behind fences. Detectives previously focused on poisoning were now digging, literally, for a deeper truth. The question was no longer why did Miriam poison her family? It was how long had she been getting away with murder? It was late afternoon when the first dog alert occurred. One of the canines trained in human remains detection stopped at the back of the yard near a rusted birdbath. At first, officers assumed it was animal remains, decomposing meat or wildlife. But the soil felt loose. Recent. They dug down nearly 2 feet before they found it, a human femur. Clean, weathered, but unmistakably human. Forensic anthropologists were called in immediately. Over the next 48 hours, they uncovered more remains. Fragments of a skull, rib bones, a partial pelvis. The bones were buried in layers, each at different depths. Early estimates suggested they belonged to at least 2 individuals. It was no longer a single mass murder. Miriam Wakefield was now suspected of multiple killings, spanning decades. The remains were sent to the state crime lab for expedited testing. Dental records were run. DNA cross-checked. Weeks later, the results came back with a chilling match. One of the bodies buried in the garden belonged to Ethan Wakefield, Miriam's youngest son. He hadn't moved out west. He'd been dead for over 12 years. Detectives were stunned. The last trace of Ethan was a community college transcript from 2012. Miriam had told neighbors he was traveling and had disconnected from technology. She occasionally mailed herself postcards from fake addresses in Colorado and Montana, writing in clumsy block letters to prove Ethan was still alive. She even left his old room untouched. It wasn't a shrine, it was an alibi. The other body? Male, older. Dental records would later confirm what no one had dared to imagine. The second set of remains belonged to Harold Graves, Miriam's father. Miriam had always claimed her father died of a stroke and was buried in a family cemetery out of state. But no one had ever seen a headstone. The obituary published in the Fairview Gazette had been suspiciously sparse. Just 1 paragraph, no service details, no photographs. But now, forensic evidence told a different story. Harold's remains had signs of blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, likely the cause of death. The same week he supposedly died, Miriam had filed to take ownership of the family home, claiming he had willed it to her just before passing. The motive? Buried in journal pages written in 1976. He did things to me. Things no father should. Mama knew. She drank to forget. When she disappeared, I stopped hoping. But I never stopped watching. He said I was his to shape. I told him, "You'll rot before I let you touch another child." And now he does. Suddenly, the perfect homemaker image of Miriam Wakefield shattered completely. She wasn't just a killer. She was a survivor. A woman who may have suffered unspeakable abuse, and buried it in the most literal sense. When news of the garden bodies hit the media, the public opinion on Miriam split sharply. One faction saw her as a tragic figure, a woman who had been abused by her father, silenced by decades of trauma, and finally snapped after a lifetime of repression. They viewed the poisoning as a desperate final act, a cry for justice in a world that failed her. But the other side saw her for what she was becoming in the eyes of the law, a manipulative, methodical murderer. Ethan had done nothing wrong. Martin, Dana, and Kyle were collateral damage. Even if Harold deserved punishment, who appointed Miriam judge, jury, and executioner? Online forums debated everything, from psychological trauma to female serial killer patterns. The town of Fairview found itself the center of national coverage, with headlines reading, "Grandma or Grim Reaper? The deadly matriarch of Illinois." Even Netflix came knocking. Following the garden discoveries, the case against Miriam shifted. What had started as a poisoning trial now became a sprawling, multi-decade investigation. Cold case detectives reopened missing persons files linked to Miriam's past, including the unsolved disappearance of Violet Graves, her mother. Though her remains were never found, one chilling piece of evidence emerged. A silk scarf with her initials VG, unearthed beneath a slab of stone near the shed. Miriam never mentioned it during questioning, but her journal did. Mama walked out to the garden. She saw the bottle in my hand. She tried to stop me. We wrestled. She fell, hit her head. I told her, "You always protected him." "Who protects me?" She didn't answer. Prosecutors now believed Miriam may have killed 3 generations of her own family. Psychologists hired by the prosecution called her a textbook case of high-functioning psychopathy. She could mimic empathy. She smiled and played the part. But her actions were calculated, premeditated, and emotionally detached. But the defense had another narrative: complex PTSD, stemming from years of abuse. Miriam, they argued, was not insane but deeply broken. Her crimes weren't born from evil, they were born from survival. The courtroom would soon become a battleground of these competing stories. And Miriam? She sat in her orange jumpsuit, expressionless. The woman who once served chocolate mousse as her family collapsed was finally facing the reckoning she had postponed for decades. If true crime stories that peel back the darkest layers of human behavior fascinate you, subscribe now and tap the notification bell. Real life doesn't always end with justice, but we follow it to the very last breath. The woman who once led Grace before Sunday dinner now stood before a jury, accused of orchestrating one of the most chilling family murders in Illinois history. But in a courtroom packed with cameras, lawyers, and grieving relatives, Miriam Wakefield had only one expression: calm. The question wasn't whether she was guilty. It was whether anyone would believe she ever regretted it. The courthouse in Fairview, Illinois, had never seen anything like it. By the time the trial of Miriam Wakefield began in late October, national networks had set up outside. Satellite vans lined the streets. True crime podcasts aired special episodes. Twitter trended with hashtags like #SundayDinnerKiller and #MatriarchOfMurder. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. At the defense table sat Miriam, 78 years old, thin, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. Her demeanor? Composed, almost serene. To some, it was chilling. To others, it was brave. But everyone agreed, this wasn't just a murder trial. It was a psychological war. Lead prosecutor Vanessa Cole wasted no time painting Miriam as a cold-blooded killer who'd plotted her family's demise with surgical precision. Her opening statement was nothing short of cinematic. This woman, this mother, this grandmother, invited 12 of her own family members into her home, fed them, smiled with them, and served them dessert, while knowing 3 would be dead before sunrise. Cole laid out the evidence like dominoes. The presence of aconitine in the food. The mislabeled organic spice blend containing wolfsbane. Miriam's fingerprints on the bottle. The journal entries with dates, names, and cryptic messages about cleansing the garden. But the real emotional punch came from the victims' families. Jared Wakefield, Miriam's surviving son, took the stand and broke down as he described his wife Dana's death in the ER. She looked at me, like she knew she wasn't coming back. She kept saying, "Mom did this." It was Mom. And I didn't believe her. I told her she was confused. That's the last thing I said to her. Tears were common. Gasps even more so. But Miriam? She remained stoic, unmoved. Miriam's defense team, led by veteran attorney Raymond DuPont, took an entirely different approach. They didn't deny that Miriam had poisoned the food. Instead, they argued why. DuPont's theory was simple. Miriam Wakefield was a survivor of generational trauma. Years of abuse at the hands of her father. A mother who abandoned her emotionally. A lifetime of psychological damage that never healed. He called in psychiatrists who described complex post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition often seen in victims of chronic abuse. One expert testified, Miriam didn't snap. She simmered. She lived decades in a prison built by her family. The dinner wasn't just murder, it was her breaking free. DuPont also leaned heavily on Miriam's journal entries, the same entries the prosecution had used as evidence of guilt. She wrote things that no one ever heard her say aloud. She carried every secret, every scar, and she documented them, not to glorify her crimes, but because she never had anyone to confess to. He ended his opening remarks with a bombshell. If you had lived her life, suffered her pain, can you say with certainty you wouldn't have cracked too? Central to both sides was Miriam's journal. Handwritten entries spanning over 30 years. Some mundane, others horrifying. Jurors listened as an analyst read passages aloud. He cried when I told him he'd never leave the garden. Like he cried when I was little. Funny how the world comes full circle. And another. They called it inheritance. I called it robbery. I fed them for years. They never once said thank you. Let them chew on that. The journal wasn't just evidence. It was a psychological map of Miriam's descent. One entry haunted the courtroom. I don't hate them. I just don't need them anymore. Perhaps the most shocking moment came when Lillian, Miriam's daughter, took the stand for the defense. With trembling hands, Lillian confirmed years of childhood trauma, including physical and emotional abuse from Harold Graves, Miriam's father. She protected us the only way she knew how, Lillian said, by keeping us close. Too close. But her support wasn't without complexity. When asked directly if she believed her mother deserved freedom, Lillian said, "No. I believe she deserves understanding. Not absolution." Jared, however, had a harsher view. "She didn't just kill my wife. She destroyed our family. Whatever she lived through doesn't justify what she did." The courtroom fell into uncomfortable silence. The line between victim and perpetrator had blurred beyond recognition. Just when the trial seemed to settle into a grim rhythm, the prosecution introduced a surprise, a voicemail. It had been recovered from a phone Ethan Wakefield left behind before his death. The timestamp, 2 days before he was murdered. In it, Ethan's voice is quiet, scared. "She's talking about it again. About Dad. Grandpa. The root of silence thing. I think she's planning something. She made me dig a hole in the garden last week. I thought it was for a tree." The courtroom gasped. That one message tied Miriam not just to poisoning, but to premeditated burial of her own son. It was the turning point. After 4 weeks of testimony, the trial neared its conclusion. Vanessa Cole's closing remarks cut like a knife. "We do not convict based on pain. We convict based on actions." And the actions of Miriam Wakefield were methodical, lethal, and remorseless. Raymond DuPont countered with quiet conviction. "There are crimes of impulse. There are crimes of greed. And then there are crimes of survival. The law must know the difference." The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, the room was silent. Cameras rolled. Reporters held their breath. Guilty. On all counts. Miriam Wakefield was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called it the most tragic and calculating crime this courtroom has ever seen. Miriam didn't flinch. She turned, nodded at her children, and whispered, "I told you I'd feed you forever." If stories like this one keep you questioning how far people will go behind closed doors, subscribe now and turn on. They said prison would break her. That she'd finally show remorse. But behind concrete walls and iron bars, Miriam Wakefield became something else entirely, a legend. The killer matriarch who served death like dessert, and never once asked for forgiveness. Miriam Wakefield arrived at the Claremont Women's Correctional Facility on a chilly morning in November. She stepped off the prison transport van in a fresh jumpsuit and black prison-issued shoes, carrying nothing but a manila envelope filled with her court documents and a tattered Bible. The guards expected tears. Resistance. At the very least, confusion. But Miriam didn't ask a single question. She looked up at the concrete towers, took a long breath, and whispered, "I thought it would be worse." What no one knew was that Miriam had lived in a prison of her own making for decades. This place? It was just a new cage with better lighting. Within her first week inside Claremont, Miriam earned a nickname from inmates and guards alike. Mama Sunday. It started as a joke. Inmates laughed about how she killed with cooking, and started asking if she'd poison the cafeteria meatloaf. But Miriam didn't flinch. She smiled. She even offered tips on how to make death by chili less watery. But over time the joke lost its punch. She was quiet, polite, eerily composed. She never raised her voice. Never cried. In group therapy she listened more than she spoke. In the library she read gardening books. In the rec room she knitted. Other inmates began to gravitate toward her, not out of fear but curiosity. She became a kind of matriarchal figure again, hosting unofficial Sunday check-ins, where she'd sit at the same table every week, and others, especially younger inmates, would gather and vent, seek advice, or just sit in silence with her. "She's like calming," one inmate told a journalist during a prison interview. "Like a haunted grandmother who knows she's going to hell and already made peace with it." Miriam rarely received visitors. Her son Jared refused all contact. Lillian sent one letter, short, conflicted, and never followed up. But there were letters. Dozens of them. From strangers. From podcast listeners. From people who saw her as a vigilante, a tragic hero, even a feminist icon. One letter read, "They never listened to me either. I wanted to kill my abuser too. You just had the strength." Another said, "You're a monster. I hope they serve you poison every Sunday." Miriam kept all of them. She never responded. She didn't need to. She already knew the world couldn't agree on who she really was. 6 months after her conviction, a streaming platform released a limited docuseries titled The Sunday Table, The Wakefield Murders. The show became a viral sensation. Narrated by a true crime host with a velvet voice, it dissected Miriam's life, her family history, the poisoning, and the shocking garden discoveries. Viewers were divided. Was she a vengeful psychopath or a deeply broken woman driven to desperation? Online, her story became a meme, a symbol, and a debate. TikTokers reenacted the moment she asked, "Did anyone finish the moose?" Reddit threads dissected her journal entries line by line. A candle company even launched a dark-humored limited scent called Sunday Roast with a hint of wolfsbane. Despite the viral fame, Miriam remained distant. When prison officials asked if she'd like to speak on record, she declined. "They'll say what they want. I've already said what mattered." One inmate, a former nurse serving time for fraud, formed an unlikely friendship with Miriam. She described it like befriending a forest fire. She's warm when you're near her, but deep down you know there's destruction inside her, like something still smoldering. She said Miriam once told her something in passing that haunted her for weeks. You can only beg to be seen for so long. Then when they still don't look, you show them what's inside you. Was that a confession? A justification? A warning? No one knew. By her second year in prison, Miriam's health began to decline. Her arthritis worsened. Her vision faded. Still, she never once asked for medical help she didn't absolutely need. Prison records showed she refused all mental health evaluations after her first year. She declined a parole hearing even though one was automatically scheduled. When asked why, she simply said, "What would I do with freedom? They already buried me." Still, there was no remorse. No apology. When pressed by a reporter through the prison warden for a statement to the families of her victims, her answer came back in writing. "I fed them every Sunday for 30 years. The last one just had a different recipe." In the summer of her third year at Claremont, a surprise visitor appeared, a woman named Andrea Owens, a true crime author writing a book titled The Smile That Killed. Unlike reporters, Andrea came without a mic or crew, just a notebook and curiosity. She sat across from Miriam for 47 minutes. The warden watched from behind glass. When Andrea emerged, she was visibly shaken. Later in her book, she wrote, "I expected her to be regretful or guarded, but she was neither. She was kind, charming, terrifyingly rational. She told me, people keep asking if I feel guilt, but guilt is for mistakes. I did exactly what I meant to do." Andrea ended the chapter with a chilling reflection. There's a reason she smiled during dessert. She knew it was the last time they'd ever taste her food, and the first time they'd ever truly see her. If true stories like this make you question what darkness can hide behind everyday faces, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. There's always more lurking beneath the surface. She had been quiet all her life, never the type to raise her voice, never the one to draw suspicion. But when the jury read the verdict and she turned with that same polite smile she wore the night her family writhed in agony, the courtroom froze. What makes a woman serve death with a ladle of gravy and then ask if anyone wants seconds? The courthouse was packed. The air was stale with tension. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras trained on the petite woman sitting rigidly at the defendant's table. Hannah Belrose wore a cream sweater set, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked more like a librarian than a woman accused of murdering 3 family members over roast chicken and mashed potatoes. Across from her, the prosecution team rested their case with an arsenal of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and a motive that cut straight to the bone: control. The jury had deliberated for just under 5 hours. And when they returned, none of them would meet Hannah's gaze. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Hannah Belrose, guilty on all counts." Her expression didn't change. Not a flinch. Not a tremor. Just that same subtle smile. Some say it was serenity. Others say it was something far colder: satisfaction. As the bailiffs moved to cuff her, Hannah leaned over to her defense attorney and whispered, "Tell them dinner's canceled next Sunday." Even now, she couldn't resist the cruelty of the joke. Hannah was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge called her actions the epitome of betrayal cloaked in domestic civility. Prison staff at Bedford Hills Correctional would later remark how normal she was. Polite. never caused trouble. She took up crochet, worked in the library, attended chapel, but the guards never trusted her. There was something too controlled, too precise about Hannah, as if she were still performing even behind bars. After the sentencing, a flood of tips poured into the police department. Old neighbors, ex-co-workers, even distant relatives began sharing strange incidents from years past. A former boyfriend who had food poisoning so severe he was hospitalized. An elderly aunt who passed after a bout of bad stew, just days after refusing to change her will. A neighbor who'd gotten violently sick after a backyard barbecue, right after declining to sell Hannah his property. None of these cases had ever been formally investigated. Most had been written off as accidents or age-related illness. But now, with Hannah's conviction, a disturbing theory began to emerge. Sunday dinner wasn't her first poison party. It may have been the last in a string of manipulations that spanned years. Investigators reopened several old cases, though none resulted in additional charges. The poison she used, aconitine, degrades quickly in the body. Without preserved samples, prosecution was impossible. But the circumstantial patterns were undeniable and deeply chilling. Criminal psychologists descended on the case with fascination. Hannah's profile was rare, a high-functioning, organized poisoner who exhibited no overt signs of psychosis or impulsivity. She was deliberate, emotionally restrained. Dr. Lena Vogel, a forensic psychiatrist, offered this analysis. Hannah Belrose represents a uniquely dangerous personality type. She doesn't kill in rage, she kills in silence, with calculation. She weaponized domesticity, used comfort as camouflage. She is, in every sense, a psychological predator. Many compared her to infamous poisoners of the past, Mary and Cotton, Nanny Doss, but even they exhibited patterns of confession or recklessness. Hannah never admitted guilt. Not once. Even in her final statement to the court, she simply said, "They never appreciated the care I gave. I cooked every Sunday. I made sure they never went hungry." It sounded more like a lament than a defense. The Belrose family splintered. Surviving relatives distanced themselves from both the case and each other. Some refused to speak publicly. Others appeared on talk shows, profiting from the morbid curiosity around Hannah's crimes. But no one seemed to agree on who she really was. Her niece, Emily, one of the few survivors of the dinner, summed it up on a 2020 special. "She smiled as my father convulsed on the floor. She smiled when I begged her to call an ambulance. That smile wasn't shock. It was victory. She wanted us to see her win." Emily later wrote a memoir titled The Final Bite, in which she described the trauma of surviving the dinner and her long road to healing. She also revealed something never included in the trial. In the days after the murders, before Hannah's arrest, she baked an apple pie, left it on Emily's doorstep. No note, just the pie. Emily never touched it. She threw it into the trash, still warm. The Belrose home was eventually sold. The new owners gutted the kitchen, tore down the dining room wall, and planted a rose garden where the family table once stood. But neighbors say no one's ever lived there for long. Some say the place feels wrong, as if the air still holds the memory of that final meal. As if the walls remember the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the poison spreading silently beneath the surface. Evil doesn't always show its face in the shadows. Sometimes, it passes the potatoes and smiles across the table. From the outside, the Evans family looked like the embodiment of suburban perfection. But behind the home-cooked meals and holiday cards was a woman who weaponized trust, and turned it into poison. This story wasn't just about one tragic Sunday dinner. It was about the kind of betrayal that could simmer for years undetected, until it boiled over in one final fatal act. If these chilling deep dives into hidden crimes, twisted minds, and real-life betrayals grab you the way they grab us, don't forget to subscribe, drop your view in the comment section, and tap the notification bell for more gripping true crime stories that not only haunt, but reveal. Because evil often wears a familiar face.